All right, so today we're going to learn about and work with square roots. So we've been doing exponents, and we can think of square roots as basically the opposite. So the square root of a number is the value that when you multiply it by itself gives you that number. So if we look at the example right here, we see this symbol. This is called a radical symbol. We have a 16 underneath. So how we say that is the square root of 16. So the square root of 16 is a number when I multiply it by itself is 4. So the square root is 4 of 16 because 4 times 4 gives us 16. A perfect square is a number that is the square of an integer. So again, an integer means it's a whole number. There's no decimals or fractions. So our examples are 4, because that would be 2 times 2. 9, a perfect square, 3 times 3. 16, 4 times 4. 81 is a perfect square because we get that by doing 9 times 9. So a number that is not a perfect square is 20. There is no number that when I multiply it by itself is 20. Because I know 4 times 4 is 16. 5 times 5 is 25. So there's no number that exactly gives us 20. So take a minute, write all of this down, all of these notes, and then move on. So let's find the square root of the following numbers. So for number 1, the square root of 100. Again, that's what this symbol means, the square root of 100. What is a number that when I multiply it by itself gives us 100? And that's going to be 10. So the square root of 100 is 10. Number 2, the square root of 64. What number when I multiply it by itself gives us 64? And that is 8. The square root of 144 is 12. And then lastly, the square root of 225 is 15. So again, the square roots are these numbers right here, 10, 8, 12, and 15. It's the number that when I multiply it by itself gives us the number inside our radical symbol. Take a moment and draw this number line on your paper, so pause if you need to. And then we're going to place these 4 square roots where they belong on the number line. So the first one's square root of 1. That one's easy, that's just going to go right here. Again, what number when I multiply it by itself gives us 1? And that's 1. The square root of 4. What number when I multiply it by itself gives us 4? And that is 2. The square root of 4 is 2 because 2 times 2 equals 4. Again, this is a perfect square because the number 4 we get when we multiply the integer 2 times 2. The square root of 9 is going to be at 3 because 3 times 3 equals 9, what's under my radical symbol. And the square root of 16 is going to be right here at 4 because 4 times 4 is 16. So taking the square root of something is basically the inverse of squaring something. So we have the same number lines here, and I kept my perfect squares of where they belonged on my number line. So this question is saying, in between which 2 integers is the square root of 6? So when I think about the square root of 6, I know that my answer is not going to be a whole number because there is no number that when I multiply it by itself is 6. So again, that's like 2 times 2 equals 4. 3 times 3 equals 9. There's no number that when I multiply it by itself gives us 6, which means it's going to be in between 2 integers, 2 whole numbers. So where would I put it if I think about it on the number line? Well, the square root of 6, this is why it's great to order it with my perfect squares. I know is going to be in between the square root of 4 and the square root of 9. When I think about where 6 is, between 4 to 9, it's a little bit closer to 4. So in between which two integers of the square root of 6 is the square root of 6, so I know it's going to be in between my integers 2 and 3. And I'm going to approximate it, it's about right here. Again, it's going to be in between the square root of 4, square root of 9, slightly closer to the square root of 4. Make sure you've got this on your number line as well. Okay, now let's think about where the square root of 8 would be and the square root of 14. So since I have my perfect squares underneath, this is easy. Square root of 8 is going to be very close to the square root of 9. So I'm going to place that right about here. It's going to be a number that's close to 3. And then my next one, the square root of 14, is going to be close to the square root of 16. I know that it's not going to be directly touching it because I have the square root of 15 in between. So it's going to be right about here. Again, these are estimates. Okay, these are estimates. They're not going to be an exact whole number with one decimal. It's going to be a decimal for my answer, the square root of these numbers, but we can estimate approximately where it would be between two whole numbers. All right, so now this question is asking for the approximate value. So the number of the square root of 6. So what is the number that when I multiply it by itself is going to actually give me 6? And it's going to be approximate because there's no one exact number. So we've already identified first where it belongs on my number line. It's in between the square root of 4 and the square root of 9, which means it's in between my integers 2 and 3. So now that I know at least where it's placed, now when I look at the multiple choice answers, I can get rid of some. D is for sure out. The answer isn't 6, we're looking for the square root of 6. I know I can also cancel out B, 3. The square root of 9 is 3. 3 is a whole number, okay, which means 3 times 3 is 9. That's not going to be our answer. Now I have 2.5 and 3.5. Well, again, I've already identified it's in between 2 and 3, so it's going to be about 2.5. It's not exactly 2.5. It's not exactly in the middle, but that's the approximate value. 3.5 is definitely out because that would be right about here. Okay, looking at the next one, what's the approximate value of the square root of 14? We've already placed it on our number line. We know it's in between the square root of 9 and the square root of 16, which means its value, the square root, is actually in between the integers 3 and 4. So when I look at my multiple choice answers, A for sure is out. The answer's not 14. We're looking for the square root of 14. What number, when I multiply it by itself, gives us 14? It's not going to be 7 either. 7 times 7 gives us 49. So now I need to look. I have two possible answers, 3.7 and 3.2. Okay, I need to look, where did I place the square root of 14? I placed it closer to the integer 4 because 14 is closer to 16 than it is to 9. So when I think about the numbers, which one is closer to 4? 3.7 or 3.2? It's going to be 3.7. All right, where would the negative square root of 4 go on the number line? So this is the same thing as what we just did, except it's on the negative side of our number line. So I know that the square root of 4 was 2 because 2 times 2 gives us 4. So therefore, the negative square root of 4 would be negative 2. So now I want you to think about it. -2 times -2. A negative times a negative is a positive. So this makes sense that I have a positive 4 underneath my radical. The negative is on the outside. So this is saying take the square root of 4, which is 2, but now we have to make it negative, which is why on our number line it's at -2. 5 and all right, take a minute, copy down this number line, and then we're going to place those 4 square roots. So the first thing we want to do when we have a number line and we're placing square roots is write our perfect squares underneath our integers, just like we did before. So the square root of 4 is 2. The square root of 9 is 3. Okay, that is going to help us. So make sure you also have this. That is going to help us be able to order the square roots that we need to. The exact same as on the negative side again, but just on the outside of our radical symbol is a negative. Okay, so this first one, the square root of 29, I know is going to be in between 5 and 6 because it's in between. It's after the square root of 25, and it's before the square root of 36. When I think about that, I see 29 is slightly closer to 25 than it is 36. I wouldn't say it's halfway in between, so I'm going to go ahead and put it right about there. It's not exact. Square root of 2 is in between the square root of 1 and the square root of 4. It's in between, therefore, 1 and 2. Slightly closer to 1, close to that center, so I'm going to put it right there. The negative square root of 3. It's going to be in between the negative square root of 1 and negative square root of 4. It's closer to 4, so that means it's going to be closer to -2 as my integer. And then the negative square root of 14 is going to be in between negative square root of 9 and 16. Slightly closer to 16, which means it's slightly closer to 4. And that's where it belongs. So again, anytime you are approximating the value of a square root or ordering them, it's very important underneath your number line to write down your perfect squares for each integer. That will help you best identify where the square root of a number is that does not have an exact integer for its value or its answer.